My name is Susan Sandahl, and I'm the Principal Investigator for the National Center on Quality Teaching and Learning. And I want to welcome you here tonight. This is our second lecture in our distinguished lecture series on quality teaching and learning for young children. The series is sponsored by the College of Education and the National Center on Quality Teaching and Learning. So for those of you who are back for your second, we're delighted that you're here. For those of you who I hope heard good things in the parking lot or in your neighborhood and decided to come, welcome, and we hope that you'll join us for the rest of this series. First, let me tell you a little bit about our setup because some of you are curious about the lights and the cameras. We are taping these lectures so that we can use them in courses and in training materials that our center is developing for the Office of Head Start. Our center is funded by the Office of Head Start. So we'll be using them for those purposes. And we will be keeping the tape of the lecture, but not the question and answer period. So at the end of the lecture, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. And we encourage you to do that. But along the way, this evening, as you're thinking of things that you want to know more about, if you can remember them or scribble them down, you'll have plenty of opportunity to ask those at the end. We do have one request for tonight. There'll be just a little bit of interaction. So you need to be sitting next to someone, all right? So look around. You have someone that you're sitting next to so that you can do something easily when the time comes, all right? Now let me tell you just a little bit about our speaker tonight, Dr. Deborah Leong, and she comes to us from Denver. She is was on the faculty of Metropolitan State College for many years, and she has published articles, chapters, books on a variety of topics, but mostly on the topics that you see up here on the screen, on self-regulation, play, and the influence of Vygotsky and other theorists on the design and delivery of early childhood education. She's perhaps best known as the co-author of the Early Childhood Curriculum, Tools of the Mind, and that's a really very interesting curriculum that lays the foundation of school success for young children and helps children meet high expectations and does that by way of play. And we'll learn much more about that approach tonight, as well as its effects on executive function and self-regulation. I'm really excited to hear this talk, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Leong.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. So today I'm going to talk about executive function, self-regulation, learning, and make-believe play. And the word executive function, it's very neuroscience, but actually it means exactly the same thing as self-regulation. It just has so neuroscientists call self-regulation executive function. And I'm going to talk some about what that looks like and how it works. Self-regulation is really related to development of the prefrontal cortex, which is this part of your brain right here, your forehead. And it's a core process that influences both cognitive development and the development of social emotional skills. So it sounds like it's a cognitive thing, but actually it relates to cognition and emotions. So just in case you've forgotten what the prefrontal cortex looks like, here it is. And so somebody's standing this way, and this is their forehead right there. So this is the area of the brain that we're talking about. Growth in the prefrontal cortex occurs during early childhood, but continues with age. And even though a child's prefrontal cortex is really not quite developed during the preschool time, there's a lot of new evidence that shows that this is the time when this should be exercised so that it grows in young children. So this is the trajectory. I stole this slide from Stephanie Carlson. It's the trajectory of executive function, and almost every time we show this slide, you'll notice that at 30, it's going down. Yeah. And that's because we lose some self-regulation as we get older. I'm hoping it doesn't hit the bottom like 0, but it is kind of sloping slightly down. But you can see there's tremendous growth before 5. There's actually a slight, another slight boost in growth in adolescence. So that's why there's adolescents have difficulty sometimes with self-regulation, because there's another spurt of growth at that time for them. So you can think of executive function or self-regulation as the traffic controller of your mind. So what does that mean? It means that executive function and self-regulation directs your mind, cognitive energy, the strategies that you know, everything. It's like the traffic controller. It brings in memory. It makes you pay more attention. It makes you do this and that. So it's this executive process that oversees the development of other things. And so without self-regulation, you just basically react to situations rather than thinking before you act. And this is a very important point because it relates to what happens with a lot of young children, because they don't have a developed self-regulation, and so they have difficulty with this idea of not being reactive. So executive function has, the neuroscience definition is, it's made up of 3 different parts, and I'm going to go over each one of these. One part is called inhibitory effortful self-control. The other is working memory, and then the last piece is cognitive flexibility. So we'll start with inhibitory effortful self-control. So inhibitory or effortful self-control is your ability to inhibit a dominant response, a response that's foremost in your mind, in favor of a subdominant or less salient one. So have you ever driven out of the parking lot to go home, and you just start driving home even though you've forgotten you're going to go someplace else? Okay, so the habitual is what is the dominant response, what's first in your mind. And the subdominant one is, you know, what you're going to do next, et cetera. So why is this important? Well, it helps you act appropriately when you're tempted to do otherwise. So young children only think of what they want at that moment, right? And they're not thinking about other strategies or reasons why their mother wouldn't want them to eat all that candy. It's your capacity to delay gratification. So this is a picture of the very famous marshmallow test. It's an experiment that was done in the 1960s with preschool children at Stanford. And they were asked to wait. I have the video, so I thought I would show it. It's actually on YouTube. And if you ever want to laugh, you'll know why. You just mark this, and if you have a bad day, you can watch it. But the importance of it is that what Walter Mischel found is that children who were able to delay gratification, when they reached college age, their SAT scores were almost 200 points higher than the children who could not wait. And there's now also a lot of research about even adults who can't wait. So here's the marshmallow test.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have 2. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? Yeah. You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
Oh, okay. So actually, even looking at adults, they found that they didn't give them the marshmallow test, but they did other tests of delayed gratification, and they found that your delay of gratification actually had to do with what they asked adults to do is if you would be given more money today, or if you waited 2 or 3 years, you could have more money. And they found that people who had the most restraint and delayed gratification actually scored the highest on intelligence tests and were more had more activity in the prefrontal cortex. So another aspect of inhibitory control is being able to stay on task even when you're bored. And you have to face it. Not everything in school is absolutely wonderful, wonderful every minute. And children really have to be able, part of being a student is being able to withstand boredom. And since a lot of you are college students, I don't think I need to explain that anymore. Okay, so to summarize, it's controlling, it also influences controlling anxiety when you make mistakes, controlling your temper when you don't get your way, being able to stop and think before you act, and stopping yourself from using one strategy, the first strategy that comes to mind for the second. So neuroscientists actually think that inhibitory control affects the rate at which you can learn. Because what happens when you learn something, right, you have to stop something else you already know for this new piece of information. So just think of a little kid who's learning how to read, and he learns that the letter A says A, right? And then you say, no, in this word it says ah. So when he sees another word, he has to remember that there are two strategies. So without self-regulation, the child would think of the one that's most current in their mind, which is the habit, A is A, instead of being able to hold that at bay. So a study that was done by Bialystok looked at the effects of this on reading and effects of self-regulation on certain core processes. So what she did is they taught children to read the word dog the typical way we do. We show pictures of dogs and there's a dog underneath it. And she did this enough so that you could just show the child the word dog and the child would say dog. So they could recognize that word. They may not have been able to sound it out or something like that, but they could read it. So then she did that. And you see what happened is all of the children without self-control read that as cat. And why is that? They can't inhibit the picture, right? The picture is the most startling big thing there, and their eyes are drawn to that and not the text. So you can see how self-regulation kind of goes on and on, affecting children's ability to read and do math and learn new things. All right, so the second process is called working memory. And this is the ability to hold more than one thought in your mind at the same time. It's like somebody giving you directions and you're being able to remember all the steps in your head at the same time. It's reading a sentence and being able to remember what the first words were in that sentence. So you can remember the whole sentence together and make meaning out of it. So examples of working memory are thinking about information and being able to use it at the same time, holding different strategies in mind and deciding on which one is the most applicable, being able to reflect on your thinking. You know, those of you that work with young children, you ask them, how did they get that answer? And what do they say? Don't know, or it just popped into my head, or something like that. And that's because their working memories are really quite small. And without self-regulation, they can't think of the answer as well as how they got the answer at the same time. So being able to take more than one perspective at the same time really involves working memory. You have to think of what you're thinking and what the other person might be thinking. So it's one of the reasons young children seem to lack perspective taking when they're interacting with another child. They think only of their own thoughts. So here's an example of working memory. So try to read this word. So to pull it together, you have to hold all those pieces in your mind. And so for little kids, you can imagine reading is a big deal because it requires so many things. You have to remember what the letter looks like, what the sound is, and then put that all together. And then you had a whole bunch of words you already read. So, and also, even playing with someone else and being a good player requires working memory. Okay, the last piece is cognitive flexibility. Okay, and cognitive flexibility is being able to change and adjust your mental effort on the fly. So as you're learning something new, keep thinking about paying more attention in a lecture, for example, when you realize that you don't know what the professor's talking about, that kind of thing. You sharpen your mind, I hope. So examples of cognitive flexibility are paying more attention when a task or situation is difficult. It means investing more mental effort in tasks that are difficult, and flexibly changing levels of attention as the task itself changes. So a lot of research on self-regulation for young children involves this, where you keep changing sets and the child has to adjust to it. So this is called, this is the Lazo's two-dimensional card sort. Children are asked to sort first by color, right? And then sort by trucks and stars. You see how you make them change the first set to the second set. And that changing is like the changing in cognitive flexibility. So what I wanted you to do is to feel cognitive flexibility and the sharpening of your attention. So what I'm going to do is to ask you, this is a very famous task, I'm going to show you a bunch of words, and you're to say aloud the color of the word, not the word that's there, right? The color of the word, okay? So you ready? You're going to all say it out loud. It starts off easy. Go. Red. No, the color, the color. So did you find your mind like, oh my God, I'm reading the words, and that you had to really focus on the color? It's really interesting. 3-year-olds do better than adults on this because they don't know how to read. So they can completely pay attention just to the word, the color. You tell them color, they can just pay attention to the color because the words have no meaning to them. But you can see how you struggled. Didn't you struggle with which thing you're supposed to keep track of at what time? So it shows you how important cognitive flexibility is, because what happened is halfway through there, it made you concentrate on the color and you had to repress the other thing. All right, so executive function skills are necessary when you need to be intentional, right? When you need to learn something new, something on purpose. It's not needed when you're functioning on autopilot. So you don't use executive function brushing your teeth. Okay, but you do use executive function when you're trying to learn something new, a new language, a new strategy. All of those things require executive function. So for Vygotskians, we believe that you talk as you think, and so it's very important that as we go along in this lecture, you have a chance to say aloud what you just learned. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to put up a question underneath these little girls, and it's called, it's a turn and talk thing. And what I'd like you to do is do that for a couple minutes, and then I'll ring the bell, and we'll come back together. Okay, ready? So fine, you have a partner sitting next to you you can talk to. Look at that person. So if you don't have somebody, move so that you can sit next to somebody. Can't have anybody alone. For Vygotskians, all learning is social. Okay, here we go. Tell the person next to you of a situation when you use your EF self-regulation skills. Not one of the tests I gave you, but just something that's happened to you where you found yourself struggling with inhibitory control, working memory, or cognitive flexibility. Go. Okay, you guys are good talkers. All right, so now I'd like to talk about tests of self-regulation, and the one in particular that was done on children in Tools of the Mind. This is done by Adele Diamond, and what she did is she did a test in which children had to switch sets just like the Zalazo two-dimensional card sort, but in this test, children took it on the computer. Looks like this. And so when they see a heart in one place, they push on the same side, and when they see a flower, they push on the opposite. So this study was done with 200 kids that had been either were in a control group or had not had tools 1 year or two. This was a quasi-experimental design. So what I thought we'd do, well, before that, what this test requires is that you hold 2 higher order rules in mind. Heart same side, flowers opposite side, and on incongruent trials, you have to inhibit the prepotent or the dominant response and respond to the other side that you wouldn't usually do. So this is another self-regulation test. So if you don't want anyone to know how regulated you are, you can put your hands on your knees. Otherwise, if you're proud of yourself, you can put it on the table. All right, so what you're going to see is each time you see a heart, you press with the thumb or forefinger on the same side. So if you see a heart on the right, you press on the right. See a heart on the left, you press on the Okay, so most grown-ups pass. And it's interesting because I think they did research and they found that most mammals pass. All right, so now we're doing the incongruent, right? So now we're going to change sets. Now when you see a flower, you're going to press on the opposite side, right? So if it's on the, you see the flower on the right, you press the, and you see a flower on the left, you press the, okay. Okay, and of course it's not that easy. So what we're going to do now is these are going to appear at random. So if it's a heart, it's the same side, and if it's a flower, it's the, okay. So there are a couple of really interesting phenomena. Did you find your brain saying one thing and your hand did something else? Yeah, that's the self-regulation part. It's really hard. That was faster than what the children experienced. So I think so what happened is that children who were in tools had 3 times higher level of self-regulation than the children that were not. And Adele says that the most important, she thought, finding, and she wished that she had actually counted this, is did you notice when you made errors, right? You know that you made a mistake and there's nothing you can do about it because you already made the mistake. So what she did is she told the experimenters that at the end of the test, the children could play more times if they wanted to, and then they could go back to the classroom. So she got calls from experimenters saying, he's been here 15 minutes and he won't leave. And she said that the tools children would say things like, if I could do that one more time, I could get it right. And actually this persistence, that's another outcome of self-regulation, is this incredible persistence and the capacity to hold anxiety at bay. So why does executive function matter? We have now research that shows that executive function predicts school achievement better than IQ and social class, which were the 2 things that we thought predicted school achievement. But actually, an at-risk child who has self-regulation in the long run will do better than a middle-class child who may know a lot of facts but is unregulated. So self-regulation predicts achievement. It affects your capacity to pay attention, and that's one of the major things that neuroscientists believe have a long-term effect on achievement. So children who have self-regulation can make themselves pay attention, and they're not constantly asked by the teacher to pay attention. They do it naturally. It affects how children interact with adults and other children. So in studies, they found children that are emotionally unregulated. These are children that have temper tantrums, that hit other children. All of that is lack of ability to control your emotions. And what they found is that neither teachers nor kids like to interact with those kinds of children. Emotion regulation relates to your ability to control stress and anxiety, and that's what gets you through learning. When you think about it, there aren't too many things that you learn like that, right? It takes mental effort. And what's fun about learning is after you've learned it, right? It's not the process of learning itself. That can often be frustrating and hair-pulling and be really upsetting to everyone. When I remember when I first tried to learn how to work my phone, and my son kept saying, well, you text like this, Mom, and he would go, and he'd texting, and I would be going A, B, C, oh, I passed the letter. So it's really frustrating when you start a lot of learning. And the importance of self-regulation is it helps you control that anxiety. Unregulated children actually get less instructional time with teachers. You don't want to spend a lot of time, and almost all their interactions are negative. So the amount of just instructional time goes down. Emotion regulation affects peer friendships, both in the short and long term. Children with better positive and negative emotions, who regulate their positive and negative emotions, have higher levels of social competence. And unregulated children really lose a lot of opportunities to learn because nobody else wants to be around them, and they receive a lot more negative feedback. So when students don't have self-regulation, if it doesn't develop early, it seems to be less amenable to change later. So a lot of researchers say it's about 7. If children haven't really started developing self-regulation by then, they're the kids that are sent more to the principal's office, and they get into more fights and arguments, they have less interaction. It just snowballs. So Adele feels that you get this negative synergy going, and that children have real difficulty in the classroom. So I think one of the most startling things is that self-regulation is really a big problem in today's classrooms. That there have been growing levels of aggression and oppositional behavior in Head Start, for example. In one study, they found up to 1/3 of the class engaged in some kind of unregulated behavior every day. So that's a lot of children. And one child out of every 40 preschool children is expelled from preschool over behavior problems. And to put this in perspective, this was a study done by Walter Gilliam. This is greater than the rate of expulsion of junior high, high school, and almost elementary school combined. So that means that children go to kindergarten and they've been through 2 or 3 preschools. So it's really a growing problem, and a lot of places just eject children that are really having difficulty with, it's really basically self-regulation problems. In addition, we kind of over-medicate, don't we? There are a lot of children who have ADHD, and really, in reality, they just don't have self-regulation. All right, so this is another turn and talk, so find that person next to you. So describe to the person next to you an example of a child that you have worked with that you think lacked self-regulation. Okay, ready? Go. Okay, so I want to now go on and sort of talk about what kinds of things happen with self-regulation. So, you know, we have these myths that it's because children are immature and they're going to grow out of it. We think they have a medical condition, they have an aggressive personality, they have families that made them that way. Although I'll tell you, I don't know too many mothers that say, I really wish I had a child who'd run around the restaurant and really embarrass me. But all right, so these translate into actions like doing nothing, you know, medicating, instituting a 3 strikes out policy, or trying to change parent practices, or blaming parents. So there are individual differences in self-regulation and executive function. Some children are temperamentally more able to do it, although almost all children still have to learn it. There are physioregulatory functions like sleep that affect self-regulation. Children who don't sleep much have more difficulty. There are also psychological processes like that enable greater reflection. Children who use inner speech or have this propensity they have high levels of language tend to have more self-regulation. So why is there less self-regulation now than there used to be? And for Vygotskians, we believe it's because self-regulation used to be the byproduct of childhood, just the way we were as children. So for example, when you think of, there were a lot more self-regulation demands on kids. How many of you were able to get up and walk around when you ate at dinner? You know, most people, I couldn't get up until my stupid sister finished her whatever peas, or she's always eating so slow. You know, so didn't your mother say everybody waits until she finishes? And we all sat and looked at her. So now research shows, where do children eat? In a car, where nobody cares how long it takes you to eat, and because your parents are taking you someplace. I saw a study that said that only 1 out of 3 toddlers actually sits down when they eat. They walk around the house. All right, so what did you do after school? Didn't you go out and play? Played in a mixed age group? Everybody played. My mother used to lock us out of the house in the summer. You couldn't even go back in. You were supposed to stay out all day. And it's interesting because Adele, Dr. Diamond, was raised in Brooklyn, and her mother threw her out of her house too, and they just played in the street. And she said when the cars came, they'd get out of the street, and when the cars left, they went back in the street. And nowadays, you would never, would you throw a bunch of kids out because people are going so fast. So what are our children doing? Right, they're playing video games, and they're watching television. And I'll tell you, a lot of the video games for younger children really involve being reactive. So actually, they emphasize exactly the wrong skill. So my son, who's now 26, he was like the first wave of children who had Nintendos, and he wanted one in the worst way. So for his 7th birthday, I rented one, and I wanted to see why they were so addicting. So I sat down to play this Super Mario thing. And so I'm playing, and Mario dies, like, by the time I hit the 2nd button, he's dead. And so he turns to me and he says, you know, Mom, if you could just stop thinking. Just stop thinking. Push the buttons as fast as you, in fact, close your eyes and push the buttons, and Mario would live longer. And you know, he was right. As soon as I opened my eyes, Mario was dead, because I would think about, oh, he has to jump over here. Whereas when I wasn't looking, I could just push the buttons at abandoned rates, just huge rates. And Mario did live like, 30 seconds longer. But the point is that planning ahead and thinking is not something that was being reinforced by playing a Nintendo. So what about the toys that children have now? In the past, we all had, my sisters had Barbie dolls, and they wore Kleenex, They were lucky they had any clothes on at all. And now, if you want to play Barbie dentist, you go down and buy her Barbie dentist outfit. So toys have become much, much more specific, requiring less and less imagination and pretend. So that grill thing, Dr. Deborah, who developed Tools of the Mind with me, every year we pick the worst toy. So this toy, all of the condiments talk to each other, as well as the hamburger and the bun, and they all interact with the grill. So you can actually never say anything, and they have this huge conversation together. But you know, a lot of toys now for little kids are like that. They interact, the toys interact, and entertain, rather than you thinking and using your imagination. And when I got on the plane, I forget where I was going, and there must have been 3 little kids under the age of 2 either using an iPad or an iPhone. All right, and then the last is games. So didn't you make up your own games? You made up your own rules. You argued endlessly, at least in our neighborhood. We spent more time arguing about the rules and actually getting down to playing the game. It was time to go home by the time we decided where first base was supposed to be. And now what do children do? They're in adult-directed activities. That's not the same as deciding on the rules on your own. So it's adults are being arbiters of what are the rules and what you're supposed to do. And it's really robbed children of the self-regulation. You notice it says self-regulation. It doesn't say teacher regulation or grown-up regulation or parent regulation. It says self. So you have to have this element of voluntary behavior for it to be self-regulation. All right, so this is the last turn and talk. So I'd like you to think about this. Do you think that today's children come to school with more or less self-regulation in your experience? And which of the things that we've talked about just now seem to you to be the thing that is causing the lack of self-regulation? Okay, so there's growing evidence that self-regulation is actually learned. Okay, it doesn't develop naturally. There's a convergence of evidence pointing to the fact that early childhood is the period when practicing self-regulation has the biggest impact on behavior. So there is now a body of research done by Stephanie Carlson on how infancy actually affects self-regulation. She did a study that looked at the quality of caregiving and the effects on self-regulation. And quality of caregiving at 12 and 15 months was sensitivity to the child's signals, mindedness, using mental state terms. I see that you're feeling this, that kind of thing. Autonomy support, offering the child opportunities to do something by themselves, setting things up. And she found that early caregiving significantly predicted executive function, measured 10 or so months later. So what I'm going to talk about now is sort of the Vygotskian view about how you develop self-regulation. So I'm just going to sort of breeze through a bunch of slides about Vygotsky in case you haven't heard of him. He lived from 1896 to 1934. He was born 1 month apart from Jean Piaget, but he died when he was 37. It's kind of amazing to think that the two giants of developmental psychology were born a month apart, isn't it? Piaget, of course, lived much longer. Vygotsky worked in high schools and colleges. He worked in special education. In fact, has a 20-volume book on special ed. He wrote over 180 articles, books, and research studies. And I used to say to Elena, it was so sad that he died when he was 37. But actually, when he died, the Russian government decided on a state theory of psychology. And the state theory was Pavlov behaviorism, because Pavlov was the same, older than Vygotsky. And Vygotsky had made the mistake of saying he thought that we should develop independent thinkers. Not a good idea. So what happened is they basically burned all of his books. He died of tuberculosis, but Elena said that the year after he died, they burned his books, they dismantled his laboratories and his whole group, and all of these psychologists left and went and did their work in other areas of Russia and basically hid his ideas for the next 20 years. So Luria, and those of you who are in psychology, Lurie was one of Vygotsky's students, and if you are interested in that whole history of that, his book, Mind in the Making, is really interesting. But basically, it's interesting to think of how politics affects psychology. So they hid his work for the next 20 years, and then there was this unfreezing of the psychological theory ideas, and so they all came back and restarted their institutes in Russia and in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And Dr. Bedrova actually studied with the direct students. So she studied with Luria and Zaporozhets and all of those people who hid. And if they hadn't been so brave, really, Vygotsky's ideas would have just died. So Vygotsky believed that self-regulation really lies at the core of human mental activity. And he felt that you could learn self-regulation by learning a set of mental tools. He believed that children grew from being reactive to being intentional. And what that means is that when you're reactive, you learn because something grabs your attention. You act first, think later. You rely on repetition to learn. So actually, your learning is controlled by something outside you. When you are intentional, you can learn on purpose. You can make your mind do that. You have self-discipline. You think first and act later. You can learn on demand. That means the teacher says, here's your spelling list, learn this. And you make yourself learn it. Maybe you don't like the words. Maybe you think that they're too long or whatever, but you can make yourself learn it. And what happens in college is you have mostly good students, and all of you know how to learn on demand. You know how to make yourself learn things. And that's something that little kids have to learn. So for Vygotsky, he says that children start out being slaves to the environment, and they end up being masters of their own mental behavior. So that's what happens in growth. You start off as a slave to the environment, and then you become a master of your own mental behavior. And that is what self-regulation is. It helps you become the master of your own mental behavior. So it's learned. So for Vygotskians, the path of self-regulation, it starts with physical self-regulation. You know, learning to control your body, being toilet trained, all of that is physical self-regulation. Then comes social emotional self-regulation, controlling your temper, not getting your way, being able to control your feelings. And then the last is cognitive self-regulation. It is the most difficult, and it takes the most time to develop. One isn't dependent on the other. They kind of all grow at the same time, but you master the physical first, then social emotional, and then cognitive. So do you notice, those of you that are teachers, that often the child who struggles with cognitive, paying attention and learning, is sometimes the child who also has no control of their emotions. They get really upset and angry when they don't get their way. So there is sort of this tie between those things. So the way Vygotsky believes that you help self-regulation grow is that self-regulation starts with being regulated by other people. So adult regulation is the beginning of self-regulation. You have to do what a grown-up tells you to do, because that's how you learn the rules of things. So preschool children spend most of their time being regulated by someone else, right? The second step, Vygotsky believed, that was really important is that you regulate other people. Okay, so first it starts off being adult regulated, then you regulate other people. You apply the rules to other people. So have you been in a classroom where a child points out that so-and-so has more than the number of cookies they're supposed to, but they are sitting behind a mound of cookies, you can't even see them? So for Vygotskians, tattletaling is the first step towards self-regulation. And I always loved this because when I was a teacher, I never knew what to say when children would tattle, because, you know, sometimes we say, mind your own business, it's not your business. But for Vygotskians, we celebrate that because that means the child knows there's a rule, which is the very first step in regulating yourself. So tattletaling is the first set of rule making and rule application. So what Vygotskians would say is, yes, that's the rule, because they believe that the child is trying to figure out, is that the rule when I have a black jacket on? Is that the rule for you because she likes you better? I know that already. So they're testing out, when does the rule apply? It's not that they want you to punish the other child, but that it's a step towards rule learning. And then that develops into self-regulation when you accept the rules and you follow them on your own. And Vygotskians argue that the place where all three of these things happen, regulated by someone else, regulating other people, and then self-regulation, those three things happen in play. And that was what makes play the leading activity, or the major activity in which self-regulation is developed in young children. But I must say that play that I'm talking about is not running amok in the classroom. Vygotskians have very specific definitions of what play is. And the kind of play that develops self-regulation is mature, intentional make-believe play. And it has these characteristics. Deep engagement, which means that children can do it for long periods of time. Just think about yourself and how long you used to play as a kid. Didn't you play all day and for several days in a row the same thing over and over? You know? So now children really don't get the opportunity to play the same thing over and over again. So deep engagement, it's planned in advance. I say, I'm going to be the teacher, you're going to be the student, I'm going to grade your papers, you're going to do this. I'm going to be the mom, you're going to be the baby, you're going to talk like this. It has roles with rules, and I'm going to come back to that because that is the defining characteristic that makes self-regulation work. Each role has a set of rules that the child has to conform to. And those rules are the first time that children self-regulate. They have scenarios that change and evolve, and what children do adapt to that. They use symbolic props. They use language to both plan the play and enact the play, and then they voluntarily accept regulation from other people as well as regulating other people. So this kind of play really emerges at about 4 to 5 years of age. And so I'm going to show you some videos, first of what immature play looks like. So can you see they're just fooling around with the stuff and running in and out, and there's no role, right? So that child is not a chicken farmer. And this is what mature make-believe play looks like.
Ask them, what's the matter? What's the matter? What's the matter? See how the wings Okay, so the doctor person's coming tomorrow at 8. Okay, tomorrow at 8. I instruct her up. This. How many times are you doing? Let's see what time she needs to come. This. Hi. Hold on. Get a shot for her. Wanna go hide there? You go. You can wait for that chair. Okay. I'll wait right here in this chair. You want the daddy and go in. You come now. Hi. I'm just checking in if I can see if he's better. I want it on Friday. I actually said it. No delays. Locked out. We close now. How about tomorrow at 8:15?
I love it. He's got the disdain of the receptionist down, doesn't he? Stop. I spared you the discussion of the insurance card, which he asks her for.
Okay, I set it up. It's a Missouri. My dog is so bad, he would rip you apart. Okay, today at 7. Okay, I write you up this one and this right here. Okay, bye. Bye.
She was kind of pushy, wasn't she?
Oh, yes, she was.
Gosh, do a lot of people get pushy like that with you?
Yes, they do.
Oh, how do you do your job? It's a hard job.
Yeah.
Okay. So you see the difference in the play. He's got a role and he's sticking with it, right? And she obeys him. You know, he says, stop, go sit over there. I'm not talking to you. So that's what mature play has. It has this role, and that role sets limits that define what the child can or cannot do. And sticking to that role is really, really important. So I have this funny story. When my son was 2.5, he was at the daycare center, the lab school. We had this one-way mirror so I could go in and watch him. So I walked in one day, and he has been stuffed into a shopping cart by these 2 girls that are dressed. I mean, they have high heels on and a boa and hat and purses, and they're holding him down. One of them is holding him physically in the shopping cart, and he goes, I don't want to be your baby anymore. And the 2 girls, one turns to the other, and she goes, he's a baby. He's supposed to say, wah, wah. That's it. So he goes, wah, 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 wah. And they look at each other, and one says to the other one, I don't understand a word he said. He's saying baby talk. So the teacher finally came over and released him from being trapped in the, but they would have kept him in there forever. But the whole point is that the role, you talk like that? Did you hear that little boy's voice? It's very different because he's that receptionist. Okay, so the role forces the child to actually inhibit behaviors that would be inconsistent with that role. So that no matter how much the child might want to do something else, the role, if you're going to be that in that role, you have to do that. And so you notice in preschool children, they notice when other children violate the rule, right? So you're the bus driver and you start to get up to do something else and the rest of the bus will yell at you. You're the bus driver, you have to sit there. Okay, so you're probably wondering why there's a picture of this little guy who's a soldier, and that's because there's a very interesting study done by one of Vygotsky's students, Malyenko, and Zaporozhets actually was the PI on the study. But what they did is they asked children to stand still under 3 conditions. One condition was, as you can see, the black line, non-play. So they're just asked to stand still. The blue line is they were asked to stand still in a role. So the adult said, you're guarding a munitions dump. This is during World War II. You're guarding a munitions dump, so you have to stand here, stand still, guard it. And then the green line is they were playing with other children, and that child was assigned to be the guard in the munitions dump. So what's interesting here is that 3-year-olds, it doesn't matter what condition, they can't stand still. And 7-year-olds, no matter what the condition, they can stand still because they have self-regulation. But look what happened to 5-year-olds. Play made them capable of standing still 3 times longer than they could when they were just asked to stand still. So Vygotsky says that play enables the child to stand a head above himself, to act much more mature than he would usually be able to do. And so what was interesting is that this was replicated in 2005. And can you see that it's completely collapsed, that 5-year-olds look like 3-year-olds, and it's only till children were 7 that they had the self-regulation, and it really wasn't that great. So what you see there, if you see the lines that go up, those were the old study, sorry, and the red line and the dark black line and the red dotted line, red dashed line, that's now. So what they found is that 7-year-olds really had the levels of self-regulation that children who in 1940, a lot less. And they followed up on the study asking the parents what children do, it's exactly like what happens with us. They watch TV, they play video games, and they're not outside, they don't play with their peers. So, you know, today there's really a crisis because a lot of what we're doing now in preschool and kindergarten sort of decry play as a way of teaching anything. It's sort of seen as a thing you do when you have nothing else to do. And we have devoted more and more time in the preschool classroom to the teaching of skills and ignoring play, when in the long run, having great play skills means that you'll develop self-regulation earlier, which means it'll be easier to learn. So it's kind of ironic that we end up devoting time to things that are going to make it even harder to learn later. And you know, the results of a lot of the current RCT studies on randomized controlled design studies on different curriculum found that, for example, knowing all your letters by the time you leave preschool doesn't predict 3rd grade reading scores. And in fact, children who don't know their letters catch up by the end of kindergarten. So we've kind of spent all this time in preschool doing letters and very little time doing play. And even we had a study that we've just finished with a group of people in Vanderbilt, and we were unable to get teachers to spend more than 10 minutes in play, have the children spend more than 10 minutes in play. So it shows you how difficult play is right now. So really, preschool is often the only bastion that could still do a lot of play and make sure that children play. So it's really up to teachers to scaffold play in a way that helps children learn. and will have a positive impact on their development. Unfortunately, in kindergarten, children don't play anymore. I don't know if you've been in a kindergarten lately. They no longer have a housekeeping area in many places. They don't have blocks. They have desks set up exactly like first grade. So the time devoted to play, they should be devoting time to play in kindergarten and preschool. And we even first grade. And so we have a kindergarten program in Tools of the Mind. And these are the children who are playing out the Magic Treehouse books. And there's one on pirates, and they play one chapter at a time. And you can see we have a lot of female pirates with mustaches. And but we argue that dramatizing a story, it's like manipulatives for math. It makes the story come alive. And children today watch a lot of stuff. It's not the same as experiencing it and playing it out. So we argue that dramatization affects listening comprehension, and maybe one of the reasons that children have difficulty with that later. So Vygotsky argues that all of this self-regulation leads to intentional learning, and that's very, very, very important for development. So I just wanted to spend a couple of seconds going over the new research on reading and the brain, because we now know that there are specific areas of the brain that actually are involved when you read. 3 separate areas of the brain. And in fact, it turns out it's not just those areas, but it's the ability to switch back and forth between these 2 areas that has a huge effect on learning. So as you can see here, it's the interaction between those 2 and your speed in cognitive processing of those areas. So I thought I'd spend just a little time discussing what we do in Tools of the Mind to support self-regulation. We have, of course, I've already talked about this, play, but we also have activities that actually teach physical self-regulation. So like playing Simon Says and games like that. This little girl is walking on a line, trying to control her body, walking on a line. Another, Montessori has a lot of these physical self-regulation games. Did you ever play that game where you ran with an egg on a spoon? Yeah, that's physical self-regulation. So you can practice that just by having children hold a block and walk with it. Or another Montessori one is where you have a bell and you try to walk without making the bell make noise. So you can have physical self-regulation games that are really important. We also build self-regulation into actual learning activities. And so in this activity, the roles are one child has an ear and the other child has lips. You can't see them. So you can imagine, what does the person with the ear do? Right, listens. And the person with the lips reads, right? And so it's like the roles you have in make-believe play, but now these are learning roles. And for Vygotskians, reading actually has 2 parts, right? You read and you also think about what you read. So you kind of listen to yourself read. So what you're doing is kind of dividing up the task into the actor and the reflector. And so children take turns doing this, and then they switch. The child with the lips now has the ears, and the child with the ears now has the lips. So another example is a hand and a check. So we have a lot of activities where one child does it and the other child checks. So this is a video of 2 little girls, and they're trying to count out the same number of objects that are on these cards. So one child counts them up and puts them in a cup and hands it to the other child. The other child checks by putting them on the objects.
Look at
Count them out and see if she's right. Are you watching, Jordan?
Look at me. Put it in.
All right, who has a check? You're supposed to put them on. Put it on.
So the teacher's talking to a bunch of kids.
No, he's right. I have to train. We're done, so we're tight.
Okay,
Now we
time
have
to
to
do this
change.
next.
Like,
Ready?
do.
Time to do the next one.
Not that one. We always do that one. One. It's okay. That one. No, it's okay. It's okay. These are ours. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Come to you. Am I right? Am I right? Am I
Tell her
right?
if she's
You're
ready.
what? No. Yes. Where's
I love to show this video because actually that is the living example of self-regulation, because before she would have bitten the child who didn't follow directions. But can you see how you can actually build the regulation into a counting activity? Children can actually do an academic activity that has the same characteristics as play. So we call this playful learning because they have roles and they're working together and they're motivated. So the principles for embedding self-regulation in content activities is that you want to scaffold the self-regulation. You know, children have to practice how to self-correct, how to choose the activity they had. You know, they were fighting, that little girl wanted to do hearts in the worst way. And how to reflect on their own thinking because they know that the answer is correct. So I see that I'm running out of time. So, because I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. So one of the things I think that's important in our discussion of development and discipline and how you manage a classroom management, is it's really important to have rule-based interactions where children, because it teaches children what's fair, it's very transparent so children know that there are rules. It encourages regulation by others. So children can regulate each other if they know what the rules are. And the most important thing is if there are rules, then you know you're not dependent on the teacher being present. You just know what the rules are so that you can do it on your own. And so I think there's nothing we can really do about changing childhood, but I think it's really important to think about your role as a teacher in promoting play and developing self-regulated learning and not allowing the desire to have children know a tremendous amount of content without thinking about the way it's learned. So building self-regulation in content activities is really important so that children are learning self-regulation all the time, not just when they're playing, but throughout the whole day. So thank you very much. And I really enjoyed talking, and I'm ready for questions.
I am wondering, I would imagine that a possible concern for why play-based activities are not effectively being incorporated into the classrooms is because it's difficult to get your curriculum requirements done and also to allow time for play. So I guess I'm wondering, how would you recommend that teachers or SLPs or PTs or anybody who's working with kids, how do you document that change is a result of play and not, like, how do you use a control to document that and not just natural maturation or the effect of other activities that are being learned through the general curriculum? Because I am right here with you. I think play is great, but I guess I'm wondering, I mean, I think that a lot of people are going to say, show me the data, and so I'm wondering what you would say to that.
Well, there isn't a lot of data. In fact, our program is we are the participants in 5 randomized controlled design studies, and they're all going on this year. And it is really difficult. I think a lot of the old Vygotskian research that shows that play has an immediate effect on children's capacity to pay attention. There are also studies, Vygotskian studies, that show that actually play affects memory. The children can remember more when they're trying to play being somebody than they can on their own. They have better self-control, et cetera. So I think that is the big challenge of the next few years is to show that play has an effect on those kinds of things. There's a problem because we've defined play often so loosely, like it's anything children do when they're not learning something or the teacher's not telling them something. I do think that the fact that all the RCT studies that have been done on the drilling and teaching a lot of content have not produced the results that we thought they were going to produce. So on the other hand, the other side doesn't have that much research that shows it works either. So I think we're kind of like in the middle of this debate and trying to figure it out. And as a grad student, a great research study is to look at that. Stephanie Carlson has done a lot of research looking at pretense play. And so we're more like, how do you teach teachers how to do it? And she's done a lot of work on pretense play and its effect on child's interaction. I think that is a tremendous topic for study now. And I think that policy-wise, I think that our country is coming to the conclusion that we want play. So it's always been a philosophical thing, I think. And so now there's evidence that it may even relate to things that you can totally measure. But I don't think we're there yet.
So I wanted to ask what happens if the kid doesn't want to play, because play is something that develops with the age, and when you see 5 years old and then they want to play like 2 years old, on your video you show without inhibition or without purpose playing, and they were younger than the one that, the secretary, the receptionist. So what if the kid is not, he cannot or she cannot play with her peers, or it's kind of hard to play, imaginary play, and it's just like meaningless. How do you encourage them to play with their peers? And the other thing is like, there is such a thing as an ADHD, and it's kind of hard for them to play. How do you encourage them to play if they do not have the attention span to do that?
Okay, so the teachers, so what you're asking me is that how do teachers get children to do that kind of play? And it's not easy because you aren't, 10 years ago it was a lot easier because we were building on children who were kind of playing more. And now they play less than they played before. So the teacher has several roles. One is setting up the classroom so it feels like it's someplace you want to play. You know the reason we love Disneyland? Why? Because you go there and you feel like you're not yourself because they have that Harry Potter land or whatever it is. So there is something about the environment feeling. If you're going to be playing hospital, it has to kind of look like one. It doesn't have to have all the features, but it has to have enough features. Children need to have props because they don't remember who they are. So I didn't show video about this, but I have video of this little girl, and she's like the customer who's gone wild. She doesn't have a fork, so she gets up to go get one, and then she sees the pizza and starts playing with it. And then the cook arrives, and he says, "You're the customer," but she doesn't have anything on that reminds her of who she is. So the teacher dresses her up, and then she spends the next 15 and 20 minutes playing the customer, but it's like she forgot when she got up to get the fork. So they need to have props that make them feel like they're that person. That's why we wore dress-up clothes, didn't you? I loved dress up when I was a little girl. That's why we love costumes and stuff like that. They have to have enough to remind them of who they are. It's important that those props, the things that they do, be child-made, not, specific. Like you don't go out and buy a stethoscope, but you make one out of a paper cup and 2 pieces of yarn. So you want the environment, the props. Children need a lot of practice. They need a lot of background knowledge. So we found it's even difficult for children to play grocery store and home. So when you think about it, children aren't really sometimes they're not in the flow of life. Think about the supermarket. Where are children sitting, 3 and 4-year-olds? Where are they sitting when the mother's going shopping? Aren't they sitting in that little car in the front? What are they seeing? They see legs and products, and in Los Angeles, they even have video games in the car, so you can pretend you're driving. It's Captain Crunchland or something like that. But so the point is, they're not sitting up where we used to sit, where you could watch what the produce guy did, and they're not seeing that. They're seeing legs. Think about what happens when they're at home. Are they watching and helping with the cooking? They're watching TV. Mothers turn that on because they don't want them underfoot. And it's not to say that, so what's happened is childhood has changed. So they're not in the flow of things. So if you want them to play house, you have to almost teach them what mommies do, what daddies do, because they're not paying attention and they aren't in there watching. So teachers have to build a lot of background knowledge. Background knowledge has to be about people, what people do, what people say. So when we take children to a restaurant, we interview each person. The waiter stands up and he goes, I'm the person that brings you your food. So I say to you, so the waiter actually acts out what he does and says. And then the customer acts out what he does, and then they show how they interact with each other. A lot of times children just have isolated knowledge of things, so teachers have to pull that together into a scenario. And you have to make the field trip. It can be a virtual field trip. You can do a PowerPoint slideshow on different areas of the restaurant. But what happens is usually when you go to the restaurant, they want to teach you how to make a pizza. See, they don't realize that what they should be doing is teaching you what they do, not the stuff, but what they do. So one of the teacher's roles is to build this rich background knowledge so that children have something to jump off of. They have scenarios and they understand how people interact with each other. It's all about the people. And then the third thing is that teachers need to help children extend the play beyond the first go-round. So what you'll get is the child will know, the doctor says, I think your baby is sick. And the mother will say, oh, I'm really worried. And the doctor will say, I'm going to give him a shot. And the mother will say, oh, it's going to hurt my baby. And that's it. They don't have any more. So the teacher's job is to get in there and say, okay, what happens next? So we do this in a group where the children generate ideas. So I have, I have a video of these kids and they're generating what could happen in a grocery store. You can get lost on aisle 13. You can't find anything. You spill something. And one of the things children said could happen is that a mouse could jump out and run around the store. Then what do you do then? So you need to help the child build the scenario beyond the set of interactions. You want them to say what could happen next. And at the highest level of play, they play more than one role at a time. Do you remember doing this, where you talk for yourself, you talk for your baby, you talk for the stuffed animal? And so actually it's 3 people playing 9 roles and negotiating those roles. And so that's the play you're aiming at. So the teacher has to do something to keep it going. Special ed children with special needs really need a lot of support. And the kind of support they need is they need a layer in the center that is sensory, that still relates to the theme. So if you're in a store, then being a cashier is a very sensory thing. Our cashiers make money, so they tear up pieces of paper. Wish it was that easy. And they take credit cards and they zing them through. And so that's often like a sensory thing. Or the child will, if it's a bakery, the child will make Play-Doh, for example. So Play-Doh cookies and things like that. So you have a role in the center that will allow a child who is really involved in sensory things to stay there so that they can eventually become part of the play. And at the beginning, what happens is you get players that are more mature, and the way they play with those little ones is like a prop. They go, stand over here, and that child say, no, do this. But that's the beginning of having a play mentor to tell you what to do. There's no other way to learn it. And eventually, they'll say, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do something else. And that's when you step in and help that emancipate the prop to being an actual role, a real role that has wants and needs.
So as a parent, I've been researching preschools in the area, specifically looking for something that had a curriculum like Tools of the Mind, but there aren't really any available that explicitly use these concepts. So I was just wondering, in your opinion, which educational philosophies, such as Montessori or Reggio or Waldorf, do you feel most closely aligns with some of these ideas that you're talking about?
So actually, you have a great set of classrooms that do tools of the mind in Washington, in Olympia. Isn't there in Olympia, Washington? Yeah. The Olympia School District has both kindergartens and preschools. But as far as other philosophies, I think that the one that comes closer is Reggio because of the emphasis on the social aspects of learning, children working together to create things that's slightly different, and they do make-believe play a lot. Montessori is, they do a lot of self-regulation kinds of activities. And Montessori, there's some Montessoris where children play. In the traditional Montessori classrooms, there's not that much emphasis put on play, but I've seen many American Montessori classrooms where children actually play a lot, and they have dress up and things like that too. So I think it's any program that really spends the time to let children have time to do that kind of play and organizes it in a way so that children can do it.
I know that you mentioned that the executive functioning and self-regulation skills are going to develop more in like the preschool years. I'm wondering if there are any appropriate strategies or any strategies that you would highlight from this or emphasize for maybe children that are 2 or 3, just maybe introductory, steps to that.
So what children are doing at that age are the prerequisites for play. One of those is just pretense. So using a spoon to feed your doll is one step removed from reality. So it's the beginning of symbolic substitution, the beginning of pretend. So also this interaction over things that toddlers have with their adults or other older children, where they do something, you do something, they do something. That exchange is really important. So all of those things are the prerequisites for play. And teachers that work with toddlers need to be their play mentor and engage in interactions and demonstrate little small scenarios like having a tea party that everybody drinks something, or playing school, or, very simple scenarios, but nonetheless pretend. So I hope I answered that.
Up here.
So during the presentation, you showed a picture of a bunch of children who were on a baseball team, and as an example of adult regulation. And
no, that was an example of adult
regulated activity, as if it discourages self-regulation. And I would think that a lot of sports, even for young children 4 and 5, can help self-regulation. So I was wondering if you could clarify why it seems to be discouraging organized sports.
Well, it's different than so if children, after they learn how to play the sport, play it on their own, then it's self-regulatory in the sense that they're now saying how to apply the rules without an adult. But a lot of times, those kinds of activities for some children are really adult guided. The adult does drills and they say, run over here and do that. It's different than letting them have a pickup game. And my son used to play soccer. And when the part of soccer that was the self-regulatory part was when the adults got out of the way and the children just played, and they chose teams and they just did it on their own. So I don't want to say that all adult regulation is bad. You have to have adult regulation, or how would you know how to play soccer? So you have to learn those things and the rules from someone, but it's just that sometimes we kind of over-regulate. And I always felt that way going to soccer games when all the parents were standing on the sideline screaming at the coach, and it's almost like really overregulated. So it's not the sport itself, it's how we don't allow them to make it up. And my son's favorite part of soccer was fooling around with his friends before the coach got there. You know, that was when they would all say, well, let's do this and let's do that. So the part that I was thinking, the part that I was pointing out is that children don't have as much time anymore to do the pickup game. And that's the part I think that we're missing, because they, you know, the coach, at least Jeremy's coach, would be there and they had to do all these drills until this time, and then everybody went home. They didn't have much time to fool around. You know, a lot of play happens out of boredom, doesn't it? Do you remember yourself as a kid? We have so little tolerance for boredom, and we worry if children are kind of sitting there kicking the can around, but that's where your mind is loose to think and be creative, really. So, you know, I really hated the fact that now we have videos in cars, because you're not even driving anywhere without being entertained. And I remember yelling, you know, are we there yet, and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of the time spent in the car, you're fantasizing about things, aren't you? Thinking about things. So I worry that we feel that boredom is so bad that we can't have anybody be bored even for a second. And that's one of the things that happens in play, because play does disintegrate. And you have to kind of stand back and let it rise from the ashes. And the second time it rises, it's better than the first. But sometimes we get so worried, we jump right in there and say, you know, do this, do that. And then all of a sudden, now it's not play anymore. It's something the adult has decided. So one of the, you know, if you know a teacher who's really good at play, one of the things that you'll notice is this capacity to stand back and watch and know the moment when it's going to rise from the ashes, but also know the moment when it's never going to, it's just so degenerated and will never come back. But that is the true art of being a teacher, is knowing that moment.
I'm kind of wondering about the flip side of what Shauna's question was how to target self-regulation in 2- and 3-year-olds, you know, through play, and that they're interchangeable, we're dependent on one another. But as kids get older and they become 6, 7, 8 years old, if they have not acquired self-regulation, what are some strategies, activities, curriculums, or something for those kids who aren't getting the play opportunities at all anymore, because it's all academics? They're 6, they're 7 years old. There's no playtime for them to practice that. How do we target self-regulation for kids that are 6 and up?
So I think in 2 ways. One, recess is really still one of the places where children do have the right to kind of organize themselves. One of the things you really notice, though, is that kids today, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds, don't know a lot of the strategies that we knew on how to organize that recess. So often recess is the bullies against the victim. I don't know if you've seen recess. It can be really awful. And there's a group, and I've forgotten their name, but what they do is they go into schools and they teach children how to decide how to choose teams, how to organize themselves. So for our kindergartners, we have something called a dispute bag, okay? And in this bag are the cultural things that we all know about how to decide. You flip a coin, you roll dice, you have cards, you pick a card, you have straws. Do you remember all of these? And you go, well, we call it scissors, paper, stone. You know, you go like this. And those are all things that we've developed as a culture to help us regulate ourselves. So we have this dispute bag, and I admit that at the beginning they actually have disputes so that they can go use it. But after a while, they get pretty good at organizing themselves and using those things. And what that does, so this group, this playground group, goes around and teaches kids all the way up to 6th grade how to do that. And what happens is fighting stops on the playground, because all the fights are about who goes first, who gets on what team, and all this kind of thing. And kids really, at that age, appealing to their sense of fairness, you can get them to regulate themselves by making things fair. And so this is why board games, all these games, chess, board games, checkers, where they can learn the rules and then apply them to themselves. Those are really important because those help them become better regulated. So even just board games, there's a recent study that was done that if kids were playing, I think, a half an hour a day, and it increased their self-regulation. So you have to help children that cheat understand why they shouldn't do that. You become a social outcast. Nobody wants to play with you. But like helping children over the emotional hump of losing is really important. So games provide both learning how to lose, learning how to win and play by the rules, and learning how to organize a group of people. So I really think that we don't, they don't play very many games anymore in school. So I think that would really help.
Okay, we're going to take one more over here, and then we're going to let our speaker have a break, okay? So one more. Do we have one here? Down here in the front row.
They finally got you. Very regulated. You're very regulated.
I was holding her down. Yeah, I needed my social help.
Other regulated.
I work in a school district, and there's so much focus on assessment, even now in kindergarten. And I heard a kindergarten teacher who was asked by an incoming parent when there was free choice, and he said, well, that doesn't happen so much except at recess now. So if you were going to give 2 or 3 key messages to a school board or a superintendent about why they should allow more play in kindergarten specifically, what would you say?
Well, I think one of them is that, so I feel that kindergartners should be playing stories because their level of development is such that they can play not their lives. So preschoolers play their lives. They play their mom, their dad, people they see, places they would go to. But the great thing about kindergartners is they can go someplace else and live this other life. And that, basing those on stories like the Magic Tree House or whatever story you want, whatever you want to choose, playing someone else's life is part of what happens when you read. You go into the author's life and you live that life. And that sets children up for comprehension skills that and so we don't have that much trouble for some children getting them to 3rd grade and getting them to be able to say decoding the words. Where we really start falling down is on the comprehension. And that's because children don't have the imagination you need to have the words disappear and have yourself just become the book. And so one of the things I think that play does in kindergarten is prepares children to live the life in their heads and so that they can become the book. So that's one thing. And the second argument that we make is that when children are regulated, there's less fighting, there's no discipline problems. We don't ever even use timeout no timeout, no nothing, no reprimands, nothing. And children really are very kind and loving towards each other. So you can change the way you do discipline in your classroom. If children are regulated, it's just all positive. So we have no children, that have, a lot of principals have told me that kindergarten is a very anxiety-provoking grade for a lot of children, that they go home with stomach aches. And I had a mother, we're in 150 schools, classrooms in Washington, D.C., again, the worst area of town. And you walk in, and those children are dressed up like knights, and they say, "Madam, may I serve you?" They really get it. And people, when we first started, people said, "Oh, these children would never play that. This is so far removed from their lives." And really, so that picture that I showed you of those pirates, those children are from Washington, D.C. They look like any other kindergarten pirate. But the thing is that one of the parents, I was in a school with Sue Brady Camp, and this parent came running up to me and she said, "This is the first time I've ever had a child who wants to come to school." She had 3 kids, and this is the first one that wants to come to school. And that's because play makes school really, really fun. And he is doing so well. She said that she had called the school to find out why no one had called her yet, because he had been thrown out of 2 other schools. And we said, he's doing fine. He's starting to read. And she said, I know, but there must be something. Because all my other kids got thrown out, and why wouldn't he? And he's been thrown out twice before. So self-regulation is important to work on because it helps children do well and feel successful in school. And they learn and they feel proud of themselves, and you do it in a way. So it's the opposite of that negative spiral. Once it gets good, then everybody feels great about being in school. And you build that because you build self-regulation, and children don't fight with each other. So we have what we call the bus drivers assessment of self-regulation. We were doing this study, and the people in the school didn't know that, and the bus drivers came and said, we only want to drive for these 7 classrooms. And the director noticed that all of them were ours, and she said, why? And the bus driver said, because the children are kind to each other, they're nice to me, they sit, they talk, they don't get in trouble. So that's what self-regulation gives you. It's this classroom that feels great.
And wasn't that great? I think this was a great way to spend the evening.